Good afternoon, YouTube. Welcome to another episode of Fittest Car Mods. This is the S60R edition. This is my friend's Volvo S60R. It's a 2004 model, manual, and today and tomorrow we are going to be retrofitting the headlights. We already have the front end pulled off and the headlights removed. These come from the factory with a D2R, R being the designator for reflector bulb in them, that's already an HID bulb. So we're going to be installing projectors into the housings, so we're going to change that D2R bulb out for D2S. The connection is still the same, but we will not have to add any aftermarket ballast, wiring harnesses, etc. because all of that is already there from the factory. We will be losing the auto adjusting headlight function that the car came with because from the factory it tilts the bowl up and down for your high and low beam. Instead, the projector will have a shutter inside of it, which I will show later on in the video. Right here we have the driver's side headlight housing. Now you can see inside of here that does not look like a standard halogen bulb. Instead, that's a HID bulb that comes from the factory. The reflector is specially designed to work with an HID bulb. Now in a standard headlight housing that uses a halogen bulb, be it either a reflector housing like this one or a projector housing like what we're going to be installing, those housings are designed specifically for a halogen bulb, and this housing, being a reflector housing with an HID bulb in it, is specially designed for that HID. If you put an HID bulb into a halogen housing, the optics they're not centered properly for where the light source is coming on the bulb, and it ends up with a lot of scattering light. You can end up blinding oncoming drivers, and the light throw does not go nearly as far as it really should. So it's important that if you're going to convert a car from halogen to HID, that you somehow replace the optics with HID specific optics. Some people may wonder why we're replacing an HID reflector housing with an HID projector housing. And it all boils down to efficiency and control of the light. A reflector housing, while it's good, a projector housing distorts the light and works better. It works much like a camera lens in that it takes the light in, sharpens it, and extends it out in a much more controlled fashion. Therefore, you get a brighter hot spot in the center of your light, and you also get a wider width that's more usable light at the side of the road by using the same wattage of ballast and bulb. Ultimately, it leads to a much better driving experience at night and much safer driving experience, not only for the driver, but oncoming drivers as well. These are the mini D2S, I believe, yeah, the 4.0s. So we're going to be installing this where the bulb is inside of the housing currently. One thing that I like to do with brand new projectors, just to make sure that they're good to go before we install them, is to test the high beam shutter. Now the shutter is this little guy right here. And what that does is that falls down out of the way, which, because this is a lens and it flips the light upside down, when the shutter goes down, the beam out in front of the vehicle moves up, and that gives you your high beam. That will be visible later on in the video after we've installed these. So I'm going to do this with just a 9-volt battery and kind of rapidly make sure everything works and that's not going to wear out after we install it. I'm gonna call that good. That's gonna be way more abuse than it's ever going to see on the road, and we should not have any problems with that ever. So now we've got the light on a more suitable working surface that's a little bit larger. We are going to use a heat gun. Now you can do this one of two different ways. You can do either put the headlight into an oven at, I've seen anywhere between 215 degrees and 260 degrees. You wanna be very careful with most headlights because the plastic lenses can quite easily melt. But if you've got a glass lens like this, you don't have to worry about that quite so much. You do want to be careful when peeling on the glass lens that you don't use screwdrivers or anything like that to pry with, otherwise you can crack the lens. This is a glass lens, and I'm just going to use a heat gun to heat up the butyl. This lens should come right off. Now at this point, with all this stringy glue, you want to be really careful not to get it on the inside on any of the reflective surfaces, because it will stick and you can't get it off very easily without damaging the chrome. Now I know that only took a few seconds for you on YouTube, but for me that took about 8 minutes of just gently pulling on it and then heating more and pulling on it and heating it more. And I've seen guys do it faster with an oven, but it dawned on me while I was doing this that if you were to use an oven with a glass lens like this, the glass lens is going to hold on to the heat extremely well, which will then transfer into your hands. And this is the factory high intensity discharge bulb. So next up is removing according to the internet, it's the HID bulb holder thingy, which is a technical term. And that is, there's 4 screws here, 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 and here. So once those 4 screws are removed, it looks like you need to pull out this little ring right here that's got 3 tabs on it like a Christmas tree stand. And there's some wire mesh behind it. Now in theory, this part isn't in the write-up that I read. It just said, oh yep, there we go. That came right out. And this was here, and this was there, sandwiching the wire mesh against the thing, which is why it wasn't coming out. So next, there is 3 T10 screws. There's also a couple of Phillips screws, don't touch those. Just undo the T10s. And there we have the reflector bowl. I'm actually going to label this the top somehow to make sure that we keep that the right side up. So this is how the projector will fit in there, which is almost just dandy. So next there's these 4 little spring pins that we're actually going to remove from the other side here. There's a little centerpiece that needs to be pulled out like such. And what these do is these hold in the high beam auto leveling bracket that actually adjusts the factory bowl up and down when you turn on the high beams. Since the projectors have the high beams built into it, we no longer need this bracket in here. So we're just going to completely remove it and all of the pins. So once the centerpiece of the pin is out, give it a squeeze and a little push and it will pop through, kind of like that. Come on. Come on. This piece comes out, don't need that anymore. Push the pins the rest of the way out. Come on, there we go. Pins come the rest of the way out, these spring pins, and we do not need these anymore. And finally, we have this here, which is the geared wheel. This is what actually changes the headlight bucket up and down for the high beam, low beam. So this would be high beam, that would be low beam as it re-aims the headlight, and it would turn to make the high beam, turn back to make the low beam, so on and so forth in the factory setup. Again, we don't need this anymore because the projector has got this shutter here that has the high beam function in it, so the bowl needs to stay perfectly still and not move because it's supporting the projector. Okay, so now there is a little button right here, and this button is what tells the car that the high beams have successfully turned back off. So we need to press this button in and get it to stay in. How I'm going to do that is push this in with the tip of the screwdriver here and dab just a little bit of super glue, enough to hold the button in basically, and then we're gonna take some JB Weld and put it over the top of the whole thing to keep it pressed down. And this will prevent us from getting a headlight, or It's like headlight bulb warning or a high beam error or something like that pops up in the message board on the S60. Just kidding. So instead, because super glue was not holding on this, we are going to use JB stick. So without having to figure out any of the little nuances and tricks and do research and whatnot, the second headlight took me about 15 minutes to get to the same place that the first headlight was. And the first headlight probably took me a total of 30 working minutes. So now we're going to continue working on getting all of the old factory butyl out to make way for the better retro rubber that we have to install. This should go by quick for you guys. Remember kids, the first rule of knife safety, always cut towards your buddy, not your body. I get butyl in the back of my shirt. Okay, so we've got the channels about as clean as we're gonna get them, and now I'm going to start reassembling the first one. I'm gonna time-lapse this first bit and figure out what exactly I'm going to do, because I'm not sure exactly what trimming I'm going to have to do, and then I'll explain what I do for the other one. Okay, so to explain kind of what I've got going on here and what you just saw in that time lapse. So we discovered last night while we were going through things that we couldn't mount the projectors inside of the bowls, and the projector shroud isn't big enough to cover the insides of the headlights. So instead we decided to JB weld the bowl to the front of the housing so that it looks like this. And then we're going to cut the bowl out around right here to slide over the front of the projector. And then also we realized that, let's see here, right there, that the projectors point kind of at the ground when they're installed into the headlight housing. So to overcome that, we read that we could use half of a penny as a shim, and no, we didn't cut that penny in half. We just happened to find one that was cut in half, because cutting money is illegal. But yeah, so we came across this penny that was cut in half and used that as our shim, which should put the headlight adjustment right in the right spot for proper, which is about 2 inches below the headlights at 25 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and knock out the other side. And you can kind of see the JB weld job on the back of the housing here. And none of the JB weld shows through the front. We used JB Quick, that way it didn't run a whole bunch, and that way we had a shorter cure time to move on to other things in the project. Now that we have the headlight housing installed, we're going to install the projectors themselves. We're not going to fully install them, but we're going to install them for mock-up. That way we can take the beauty cover on the front that has the bowl JB welded to it, cut out the back of it, and make it look all pretty before tonight when we actually permanently mount the projectors into the headlights and level them, etc. So you can see some of this motion right here that I was talking about earlier, and that's a problem with the silicone washers. We don't even have the silicone washers in there, and you can still see movement. And by JB welding it, that will eliminate a lot of that extra movement that happens, and it'll also prevent it from rotating like this, because you can see right now that it freely rotates. the JB weld will prevent that rotation, unlike the silicone washers. So we ran into a problem with the lights being aimed too low, even with that penny shim in there. So what we decided to do is poke a hole in the back. There's a screw here and a screw way back here. So I poked a hole in the back of the other housing. I'm going to do this on this one, and added some washers as shims. And we also bought some number 8 by 1.5 inch screws that I used to replace the factory screws, and that will the aluminum part here is what's hooked up to the adjuster, so that will tilt the plastic plate that we're mounting the projector to back a little bit and bring it into adjustment. I'm going to use 6 of the number 8 washers as spacers on each of these upper 2, and I also have to loosen up one of the lower screws to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. Here we go. All right, there's the front of the car with the projectors and the beauty covers partially in place. Now the first one, I didn't have the car leveled. This is something that you might learn from my mistakes on here. I didn't have the car leveled on this first one, and as you can see, if I get closer here, I cut the hole quite a bit too large, especially down there at the bottom. That will probably end up showing through. I plan on using aluminum tape that you would use on housing ductwork to hide that. I've done that in other instances where I've accidentally cut too much off. This one over here looks amazing because we had everything leveled before I trimmed the bowl, and that honestly could not look any better. And the shroud, which I'm going to trim up next, we have the shroud here, and that sits right like that, and is basically another beauty cover, but I have to trim it so that it slides inside and over the projector. All right, just so you can see what I had to do, this is what it looked like when I started, and this is what it looks like after the cuts. Let's get that in focus there. Quite a difference. Almost kind of looks like a TIE fighter with the way the things are here. Kind of cool. So I'm going to trim this one down, and that should give us a pretty clean end result. Here they are all mocked up. We still need to put the JB weld on the projectors after we perfect the aim a little bit later once we've got less light. And the shrouds aren't pushed on yet, but overall, very, very, very pleased with how these have turned out. Ha! Oh, what the?
What moved it?
That's a good question. Did they both move?
No.
Just the one.
Passenger. Still feel like the rotation's up on it. Like it's yeah, that seems better.
Dude, that looks pretty baller. Alright, so now we're wiring up the high beam switch, and it's wires 5 and 6, which are the number 6 down here on the bottom is the ground wire. The one right above it is our high beam wire. I'm going to solder this in place and put some heat shrink tubing over it, because solder is way better than T-taps or anything else that you can possibly do. Now that we've got the shrouds painted up, trimmed up, the bowls cut up, going to start cleaning everything, getting it all nice and polished up, fingerprints off of it, dust off of it. That way we can reassemble it and have it look all shiny, factory fresh. I think there's... Oh.
Do you need more paper? You got...
Careful, Tice.
You got that, people?
That's a first.
You got
That actually worked kind of well. If only they were all that easy. You will have noticed that near the end of that I put some RTV silicone on the inside here of the shroud. That is to keep it from coming off. We have these clips here, but I've seen these pop off, so I just put a couple little dabs of silicone to make sure that it indeed does not pop off of the headlight. Done! This headlight is done. Reassembled in one piece. Done. All right, and here she is in all of her glory. Freshly retrofitted 2004 Volvo S60R. Output is incredible, and it looks like it came that way from the factory. Quite happy with the result on this. Alright, that does it for today's episode of Fittest Car Mods, Volvo S60R edition. If you liked what you see, please like, comment, and subscribe. And let me know in the comments if you want to see anything else, or if you've got any questions. I will do my best to answer them in future videos. Thanks for watching.